All right, welcome to week 6, everybody. It's lovely to see you on this fine Friday morning, albeit perhaps a rainy one. Today is the next iteration of our task workshopping focus. So we are really going to be, almost going straight into our breakout rooms to begin the process. We don't have a lot of fanfare at the beginning and end here. We're just going to do a little bit of setup and a reflection, and then we'll come back together again to do a final reflection and next steps. But we have come remarkably far. Time has flown, and we are in week 6. So this is the last session that we'll be doing task workshopping with your tasks. And then we have 2 more weeks of thinking about some content and next steps. I know that not everybody has had the chance to do a workshop here in the session since we have a larger group, but the great thing is that in addition to these collaborative workshops, we also provide the opportunity for you to sign up for one-on-one workshops with one of us at LDC to really get your final task draft, get it shaped up, refined the way that you want to have it before you submit it to national peer review. So I'm going to talk more about that at the end of the session and share the sign-up sheet with you so that you can grab a slot. Those are really great opportunities to just focus in on your task with one person and make final decisions. But we are going to start now with our kind of reflection for the week. And I'd also like to introduce our guest co-facilitator today, Jen Bean from Pennsylvania. Hi, Jen.
Hi.
She has graciously joined us to lead one of the breakout sessions today, and she's a fantastic longtime LDC expert, fully certified coach in Pennsylvania. So you're going to love her. Jen, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about where you are in your role?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm really excited to be working with you today. I work at a educational service agency here in Pennsylvania at IU13, and I'm a literacy consultant there, and I'm really excited to work with you today on your tasks.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here, Jen. And Jen will also be one of the facilitators that you can sign up for a one-on-one with. So we wanted to make sure you had a chance to meet her and get to know her a little bit, so you know you'd be in good hands. All right, let's begin as we usually do in the chat with a little reflection. Usually we ask you to reflect on something specific from this week's asynchronous work. Since we're now in week 6, we're going to ask you to kind of think back across the course of our sessions together and the content that you've been experiencing in between PLCs. And just think about the question, what across everything has been the most useful content to you as you have developed your task or given feedback to your colleagues. So I'm going to post the question in the chat, and you can either copy and paste from the course or just type in your thoughts. But thinking back across everything we've done, what has been really that most powerful content in helping your thinking? Really interesting responses coming in. People thinking about this from different lenses, right? Some of you thinking about your own work as a task designer, some of you thinking of your work as a coach and supporting others and the resources and protocols that are valuable in that work. But as always, a couple of key themes that I think we hear a lot, right? One around collaboration and just how important that is to us as thinkers, to teachers to have the opportunity as they're refining their tasks and instruction. And standards, they're not sexy, but they're important. And some of the simple, repetitive things we do, like color coding, constantly revisiting that question of alignment, really is powerful. And I'm really happy to hear that it has been powerful for you all as well. So awesome reflections, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing. We have a few more weeks to get to know some additional protocols and resources here with our focus on the task. And then we'll be on hiatus through the holidays. And then in the spring, we're going to be picking back up and really redirecting our attention to skills and instruction and thinking about how these tasks play out in the classroom so that students are really scaffolded in a supported way to see success on these really great, rigorous tasks that everybody is designing. So just thinking ahead, we're going to have a lot of fun with that as well. But let's come back to task land. So in a few minutes, we're going to go into our breakout sessions, and we're going to be workshopping 2 tasks in each of the breakout rooms. So we'll really have close to 40 minutes in breakout rooms, which should allow us to dig in about 20 minutes per task. I'm going to actually hand it over to Jen to get you set up with all the resources that you need for the task workshopping experience. While she does that, I'm going to be divvying people up into our breakout rooms, and then we'll go from there. So Jen, take it away.
All right, well, before we begin, we're going to open the task workshopping protocol and the key documents that we'll need when looking at the tasks. So I'm going to post these in the link here in the our chat window. And you should see them pop up. What I posted was the task workshop protocol, and everyone, if you could get these up now, that would be great before we go into our small groups. The standard stock booklet, the LDC task template collection 3.0, and then the task pitfall checklist, and also the curriculum alignment rubric. All right. So you should have four documents, 5 documents in all.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen. And I need just about 1 more minute to get these breakout rooms set up. So I'm also posting the link to our collection in Core Tools. So while I'm getting everybody divvied up, if you want to get in there and start taking a look at one another's tasks, if you haven't had a chance to do so yet, that'll help contextualize what we're going to be working on. And I just need 1 more minute to get everybody divided up into our rooms. All right, thanks for your patience, folks. I think I've got us divided up the way we need to be. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. As before, you'll see that invitation pop up on your screen. You just need to accept it. And we'll be in our breakout rooms until the last 10 minutes of the session. So we'll see you on the other side. All right, good morning, everyone. Let's see, I think we're waiting on 1 or 2 more people to join from the main session. There we go. Here's Brooke. Wonderful. Okay, so let's dig in. We have 2 really wonderful tasks to look at today. We have a social studies task and an ELA task. Rachel, did your partner leave you hanging for task workshopping today?
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute.
No.
Mr. Goins, my partner, is actually out at a training today.
Okay.
And unfortunately, my background is not social studies, but we did get together and he taught me so that I would be able to verbalize things today.
Oh, well, I'm glad he at least helped you get ready before leaving you here.
He did. Yes, I'm thankful.
Good, good, good. So we're actually going to be starting with your task, which is a social studies task. And that's okay. We don't have to be experts in the content area. We can really draw on, what we have in the standards and the materials to figure out the right pathway forward. So I'm going to post a link to the task in the chat. And we're going to use our protocol to really think through this together and hopefully leave Rachel with some ideas to take back to her partner and consider as they are moving forward with the revision of their task. So I see everyone popping up in there, and in just a moment, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here we go. So Rachel, before we dig into the protocol, I wanted to double check because I had a suspicion based on what I saw in the standards, but what course is this task designed for?
It is designed for both AP World History and regular World History.
Okay, that's what I was wondering because I saw the custom standard and I went and looked around and I thought that it came from the AP framework. So
Yes.
That's very helpful to know as a framework. And so this would be for, I see grades 10 through 12. Is there a range of students in those courses in terms of grade level?
It probably should just be 11th and 12th. I'll have to clarify that with Mr. Goins.
Okay. All right, well, let's dig in. So as always, we'll start by reading the task out loud. Then we'll ask Rachel to share a little bit about the intention behind the task. We'll start by thinking about standards alignment and we'll go from there. So I love the title. I always love a quote in the title. We are looking at Martin Luther and Reformation, and we have task template IE4, which is analysis. And the task reads, after reading primary and secondary sources over the Protestant and Catholic Reformation, write an essay in which you analyze the perceptions of Christian religious reformers. Support your discussion with evidence from the texts. So Rachel, share with us a little bit about the purpose behind this task.
It's really intended to get those students to think critically about both primary and secondary sources. And the AP standard was chosen as a focus in order to lift those other students who are not in AP to that rigor. And the secondary source was chosen, it's a wrap, it was chosen to add a little bit of fun and certainly a different perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you guys haven't had a chance to open that, it's really fun. It really does tell the story in quite an engaging way. All right, wonderful. So now let's take it to the group. We're going to think about the standards and what we notice about alignment between the focus standards and the task. So we have the RH version of Standard 9, which is, it's nice to see those discipline-specific versions in the secondary grade getting some play, which is to integrate information from diverse sources, both primary and secondary, into a coherent understanding of an idea or event, noting discrepancies among sources. Then we have our writing standard 2 for writing informational explanatory texts. And this key concept from the AP framework. Reformers Martin Luther and John Calvin criticized Catholic abuses and established new interpretations of Christian doctrine and practices. So let's open the discussion to the group. What do you all notice or wonder about the alignment between the standards and the task?
I myself am wondering, should we include the titles of the texts in the task? Or is that necessary?
That's a great question. You can definitely go either way. I think in this case where you have multiple texts, it can kind of clutter up the prompt to name all of them. And so kind of referring to them in shorthand by primary and secondary sources on topic is actually a really great way to keep the prompt concise.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm wondering about the language in Standard 9, that very first focus standard there, because noting discrepancies among sources is a really, really important piece, especially at the 11th and 12th grade level. I would love to see some of that language in the prompt so that students know that's an important piece to work into their final product. And then the instruction should follow after and lift that up as well, making sure that that's scaffolded throughout the instructional ladder. So just a thought.
We had the pledge and now we have announcements, so it's really hard for me to hear. So I'm reading what Nicole is typing. So thank you, Nicole.
Sure. So that's a really great point, Katie. That seems to be a really significant part of the standard at that grade level. And it surfaces another important question, which is, do the sources provide interesting discrepancies to dig into, right? So I know the group probably hasn't had a chance to really dig into these sources. Rachel, if you can hear us now, I'm not sure if the announcements are over. Can you share a little bit about the sources? Do they provide some different perspectives and discrepancies that students would be able to dig into as they think about the perceptions of these reformers?
Announcements are still going on. Can we come back to that question?
Yes. Okay. The travails of being in the office for the workshop. Okay, so let's just get some more observations and questions from the group, and then we can go through all of them. What else are you noticing?
I don't know enough about the writing history standards. But to me, a narration of historical events and an analysis of those are very different. But I don't know if there's one that fits better.
Yeah, that's an interesting standard. I think that sometimes when you do look at the discipline-specific versions of the reading and writing standards, they actually are more narrow than the general ones in a way that isn't helpful. Not to totally critique what's there, but I think that especially when you see the phrase like including in the standard, it's helpful to know that's something they want kids doing, but it doesn't limit us to only that. And so I think that given that it is sort of the main standard for writing informative explanatory text in the discipline, it probably still is a good fit. And it doesn't prohibit us from getting deeper into an analysis, which is called for when you pair it with the reading standard and the content standard. So I think it's important to key into those words like including or such as in some of these standards so that we don't get totally limited by those specific examples that they sometimes include.
I hope you can hear me over the announcements. If you will go to all standards, we did include another standard. Well, we included other standards. We included other reading standards and other writing standards, hopefully to clarify, because we toyed around with that focus standard, you know, trying to decide, okay, announcements are over, thank you. Trying to decide whether we should go to the ELA version of the writing standard that would include analysis, or whether to keep that history writing standard.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was going to say too, Nicole, about that, and Alicia, about that informative standard too. You know, as you see the progression of the writing standards, all of them, for ELA and for the content standards, include narration, especially as students get older, as a support system for the other two modes. Mm-hmm. So I think all that standard really is asking, not all, but what that ask is about using just kind of a retelling or a narration, almost could be like a summary to tell what the event's about or what the scientific procedure or process is about in order to convey that analysis. If they never allude to that or use any kind of, and they call it narration, to me, I think of like small snippets of anecdotes or phrases that are just a retelling of sorts of the situation, because you would have to have that in a historical perspective in order to move forward into the analytical piece. Does that make sense?
I see lots of nodding. Yeah.
Support piece to further that informational mode.
That's such a great point. I think that sometimes when we utilize the standards, we feel like they're asking us to draw really stark divisions between the writing modes, but in reality, you know, the modes intermingle in real world writing, right? You use narrative and explanation within an argument. You might have an argumentative component of an explanatory piece. And so allowing for some of that overlap is really important.
Nicole, at this time, do you want me to go back and talk about the texts themselves?
That would be great.
Okay. The primary source, the 95 Thesis, is by Martin Luther, of course, and it was basically his reaction to what was going on during the time period. And it is really the start of the Reformation. And so that's the primary source. There is another primary source. It's a spiritual exercise. And it is basically just rules for how to interact with the church, how to follow the church's teachings. So that's another primary source from a different perspective. And then the secondary source, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, is a rap written by students at Yale that does give a different perspective on those religious events.
And is it more of an overview, or does it kind of have a clear stance on the events?
That I can't answer.
Okay, that's all right. Something to consider.
Yes.
Okay. So we've got definitely differing perspectives that probably would give students an opportunity to do the work of this standard that calls for noting discrepancies among sources. So we could definitely think about ways to get that language into the prompt. There might be an additional demand or something that we could use. But as you're talking, I'm also wondering about the focus in the prompt on perceptions of Christian religious reformers, because it sounds like the primary sources are really great ways to understand the perspective of reformer versus the perspective of those who are kind of trying to keep things aligned with the way the church works. I'm curious to know how you guys landed on perceptions of reformers and whether the texts give enough for students to analyze that aspect of this topic. Does that make sense?
It does, and that's a word that's highlighted. I'm old school, so I print out everything, and that's a word that's highlighted on there, because I don't know that that's the precise word that we want.
Okay, so let's think about that in light of the content standard, right? Because that's where we might get guidance. Let me go to just focus standards only. I actually looked at the framework that this came from, and I wondered if there might actually be a different content standard from that set that would give us clearer guidance to how to really word that part of the prompt. So I'm going to pull that up so that we can look at it together. I'm trying to talk and navigate at the same time. Sorry for my pauses. That's what's happening. Okay, so let's see, key concept. I'm gonna just. So this was, am I in the right place, Rachel? Is this where this standard came from, to your knowledge? I think it was this one.
I so wish, yes, it is. You're in the right place. I so wish Mr. Goins were here, because he is the content expert, and he's so well versed. He sent me some notes after our conversation, and he did mention using key concept 1.2D, but I don't see that added in our module anywhere yet. We're having a little trouble with what he adds and what I add not showing up on both sides.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, sometimes that distance collaboration can be a little bit tricky. Well, let's just pull it in as like a comment and see if we can play with it a little bit. Oh, nope. It didn't want to let me copy from that PDF yesterday either, actually. So maybe that's not going to work. Okay, so the Catholic Reformation, exemplified by the Jesuit order and the Council of Trent, revived the church, but cemented the division within Christianity. And that's interesting, because that seems to connect to this more overarching piece of the key concept, which is about pluralism and challenging the idea of a unified culture. And so I feel like that could be an interesting thing to play with in the prompt. And I think given the time we have right now, we won't be able to get too far in that direction, but that might be something you could take back to Mr. Goins and explore together. While we're here in the next 2 minutes, because that's about what we have before we're going to switch over, let's come back to the reading standard question and see if we can play with the task prompt to get some of that discrepancies among sources piece in there. So as I always try to do before making any changes, I'm going to create a snapshot. I always want to sing the like Jeopardy song while this is happening. And I think that what'll be nice to do is play with the additional demands, because I think there are additional demands we could use that would give us a nice opportunity to pull that piece in. So, as you're playing with the task, you may change what goes here in terms of the content blank in which you analyze blank. But then at the end of the prompt, there might be an opportunity to add something in. So let's just kind of scan through these additional demands, and everybody kind of stop me if one jumps out at you as potentially useful here. I'll give it a minute before scrolling down to the next few.
What jumped out at me were numbers 1, 3, 8, and 11.
Okay, so be sure to acknowledge competing views. What lessons, conclusions, etc. can you draw about blank? Explain how blank and blank are connected, and connect blank and blank in your response. So 8 and 11 are kind of
Yes.
similar. Yeah. Let's play with one. Which one do you want to choose for now?
I liked, I think it was 8.
Okay. I like 8. It really allows you to add richness to a task,
Okay.
right? Because it asks for an analysis in the body of the prompt, and then it just lets you drill down with more specificity about things that you want to see them addressing and the relationship between things. So what might go in these blanks? If we're trying to think about how two things are connected or related.
Could it simply be explain how each source gives a coherent understanding of, I'm trying to tie that into, and then the next part B, and also noting the discrepancy among the sources.
I'm struggling too, Jennifer, with how this one can pull that discrepancies piece in. There was one about identifying gaps.
Mm-hmm.
You would have to shift some of the language in it. I'm not sure we can do that on that demand either.
Yeah, you notice that this is one of the few demands that doesn't have blanks to fill. It's just sort of stock. That one and the first one about acknowledging competing views, they are just like as is.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe, again, something to think about as you're moving forward. Maybe an additional demand will work and you can play with wording in different versions of that. Or maybe it comes in, the body of the prompt itself. It may be something about, analyzing. I think when you say analyzing the perceptions, it implies that it's about different perspectives and potential discrepancies, but it's not completely explicit yet. And so maybe by adding language there about, differing perceptions or discrepant perspectives or something like that, it could allow you to get that in a more direct way.
I like what Kate posted in the chat. Explain how the discrepancies among sources impacts your understanding of both the Protestant and the Catholic Reformation. Maybe that would work.
Very nice. I'm going to put that in a comment bubble.
Okay, thank you.
So that you have that there and you can take it back and consider it. That's lovely. Yeah. All right. So we are going to change directions to our second task. Rachel, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
Hopefully we left you with just some things to think about, to take back to your partner and consider as you are moving forward with this task. And hope you guys will sign up for a one-on-one so that we can really get in there and finalize some of these decisions.
Perfect. Thank you. And to think when I was in the classroom, I just wrote tasks all willy-nilly.
I think that all the time, right? It's sometimes people are like, you spend how many weeks on writing a task? And I'm like, trust me, it can take that much. All right, so we are going to move to an ELA task. This is Jennifer's task, who's graciously agreed to let us take a look at her task. And it is on The Road Not Taken, one of these wonderful classic and sort of oft misunderstood poems, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and put the link to her task in the chat. And I'm also going to start sharing my screen again. And we're staying in secondary land, but this time grade 6, so kind of hitting that intermediate place. And one thing I really appreciated, Jennifer, is that you have taken some time to flesh out your overview and to provide some context about the module. That's one thing that everybody here will be considering over the next couple of weeks. There's always something default there in the overview, but that's really space for you to provide almost like a book jacket for your module, with the audience being other educators who might want to use it, just to contextualize it much in the same way that we do here verbally in the task workshops. So we are going to take a look one of the reasons I actually asked Jennifer to share her task today, because I thought it was a really neat combination of standards that we don't see that often. And so it was a good opportunity for us to dig into these literacy standards. It's a combination of standard RL6, which is about point of view, and RL5, which is about structure. So the prompt reads, after reading The Road Not Taken, write a literary analysis in which you analyze the theme of the poem and explain how Frost uses each stanza to develop the point of view of the speaker over the course of the poem. Support your discussion with evidence from the texts. So Jennifer, tell us a little bit about your thinking behind the task and what you're hoping it will accomplish for students.
Well, the reason that I connected the two standards was really the word development from both standards, if you will. When you look at standard 6, it's how the author develops the point of view of the speaker, and then 5 is about how each stanza, or if we choose each stanza, or if we do the first or the last, how it contributes to the development. And here we're just looking at theme. And so in my mind, when I started looking at these, the point of view and the speaker and the theme kind of tie together, and the development of those is kind of how I tied both of those together. So
wonderful. So what I just picked up is really important in your explanation is that in this particular poem, point of view and theme are tied together very tightly. And so in thinking about one, you would probably be thinking about the other, which made this a really natural pairing of standards. So that kind of thinking is really wonderful, thinking about in a particular text, what are the opportunities, what does it really lend itself towards in terms of the kind of analysis students would do. So let's hear from the group. We've got, she really clearly laid out the focus of each of these standards. What do you notice or wonder about the alignment right now between the standards and the prompt?
Okay, I'll bite.
Thank you.
I think that students are being asked to write about theme and point of view. So if that's what we're looking for in their final product, then all the instruction needs to make sure, I guess, to support or scaffold those two big ideas, and how this whole thing about how the stanzas support the point of view over the course of the poem. That's big, like especially for 6th graders. I'm thinking about the ones I know and have had experience with. That in itself is really big. So Jennifer, I guess my question to you is, what do you expect to see students do out of those two big topics, like in a literary analysis? Are they going to tie those together all the way through the essay or analysis? Are they going to be separated? I guess I'm thinking about how students are going to integrate those two.
Well, that's a good question, because I've toyed with this and played with this. Do we look at every stanza because there's only 4, or do we really focus in on maybe the first and the last? I honestly, I'm not sure. As you know, 6th grade is a productive struggle for me because it's only been in elementary for a few years. So I don't know. I don't know what that's going to look like yet. I'm still getting there, trying to make that relationship and what that's going to look like in their response. I did think about this, and looking at the standards, it's not necessarily that the standard doesn't ask them necessarily to define the theme or the point of view, it's how it's developed. So I don't know if in my instruction going back and talking about specifically what the point of view is and what the theme is, so that they don't have to identify that in their response, then maybe we could tie that together through instruction.
That's an interesting point, Jennifer, because if you were using standard R2, it definitely says determine theme, right? And that might be something that you want to do in as a supporting standard in instruction. So maybe that like determining possible themes is more collaborative among students. You know, I certainly would hesitate to say just give it to them, right? Because you want them to do the interpretive work, but making that scaffolded, collaborative, and so on, and then allowing their thinking work to be more about the development could really make sense here to kind of mitigate the challenge of this task, because it is really challenging in a wonderful way, I think, for students. And I also noticed something similar about the question of sort of like, is it two separate asks? Is it one thing together in terms of point of view and theme? And one thing I noticed that I'll point out, because this happens a lot, is that, you know, when you're playing with the language of the standards and you're trying to get the complexity of multiple standards into the prompt, sometimes an extra verb sneaks in. Right? And so it's not that you're forbidden from putting verbs in these blanks, but the idea of the task templates is that that verb, the cognitive demand, is kind of set. And if you introduce additional verbs in the body of the prompt, sometimes it can stray or confuse the purpose, right? Or take it, kind of split it into two different directions. And so I'm wondering if there's a way to reword this part of the prompt to eliminate that second verb and make it analysis of one thing, even if it's the interaction of multiple things. And then also never forget that we have the additional demands, right? So we can always come back to those if there's a different way we want to approach it. But let's think as a group, knowing what Jennifer said about the fact that point of view and theme are really closely tied together in this poem. Let's see if we can find a way to word that in the prompt with one verb. So it's just analyze blank. Let's play with what we could put different in that blank.
Could you simply say, analyze the theme of the poem and how Frost's point of view is developed? That's still a little awkward.
It's a possibility. Let's get more possibilities.
Could you, so the standard says develops the point of view of the narrator. So could you analyze how the author develops the point of view of the narrator and contributes to the development of theme throughout the poem? Because the theme one says how it's conveyed through particular details. So if you're looking at those particular details and you want it to tie to point of view, I don't know.
We've got an idea in the chat. Analyze the development of the theme of the poem through the point of view of the narrator. So what's interesting here is that all these possible revisions are definitely bringing us closer to that integration of how point of view and theme are connected in this poem. But in the meantime, it has dropped out a little bit of the structure piece from standard R5, yes. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So can we keep that? Because I really think that this, you know, it makes a lot of sense. It's almost like that standard 5 provides guidance for the students to think in a chunked way about like how each piece of the poem contributes to that development. So I don't think it's too much to include that. So let's see if we can find a way to bring it back in.
And as you're thinking about that too, a big question that I have, do I just do the first and the last stanza? But there's only 4 stanzas and I hate to lose those middle 2 and what they contribute.
I'm going to give everybody a little thinking time.
I don't know who posted it in the chat a second ago, but somebody, could you let the kids choose the stanzas they want to use? And that way they have some choice that supports their thinking and you don't get the same response from every kid. Somebody else suggested that in the chat. I don't remember who it was, but.
And I just brought that comment over from the chat into the module bubble so that there's a record there.
Is this an early in the year kind of module, or is this later in the year?
Definitely later.
Later, okay. I was going to say, if it was earlier, I would be thinking just because it is poetry, it's figurative language, it requires inferential thinking. I would just tie 6.2 and 6.5 tightly together. But if it's later in the year, then as we've looked at point of view, then I can start layering that standard in as well.
All right. Any ideas bubbling up about how we could reintegrate the structure component of Standard 5?
Nicole, one last point. I'm thinking
Mhm.
standard 6.5 and 6.6 are heavy hitters all by themselves. A lot of times you see them paired with standard 1 or standard 4, which is the language standard, and the fusion of the two is a little more seamless.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I'm just thinking about the choice and narrowing it, Jennifer, to one or the other. I don't know if that would make it easier in the instructional process, and then you can kind of visualize what it is you're wanting students to know and be able to do. I don't know. It's just something I'm thinking. Nicole, you said it at the beginning, like standard 5 and 6 are an interesting pairing.
Mhm.
And so it might be something to consider, that those two may not seamlessly work together. I think they both lend themselves really, really well to the poem.
Mhm.
I just wondering about the outcome, I guess.
Yeah. I think it could go either way, right? I think you could definitely pair 6.5 with 6.2, and it would be easier to get the integration that we're looking for because 6.5 already addresses theme, 6.2 is about theme, and so it really would be a simpler fit. I don't think that it doesn't work to do 5 and 6 here. It's just a little more challenging, right? As I've listened to the conversation, I wonder if it could be about, if the theme component could be the drawing conclusions at the end of the analysis, where maybe it's more about analyzing how, each stanza helps develop the narrator's point of view, and then what conclusions can you draw about the theme of the poem, because it's that point of view that kind of leads to a theme. Would you agree with that, Jennifer?
Yes. In fact, I'm trying to scribble that sentence down as quick as I can. So if you want to.
I got you. So what I'm suggesting is it could be in the body of the prompt, in which you analyze how each stanza, and this won't be perfect, but or how each stanza develops the narrator's point of view, perhaps. And then as an additional demand, what conclusions can you draw about the poem's theme?
Nicole, I was also thinking about it as a student. If I'm going to write this response and trying to think about the organizational structure of that analysis, I would then, if it's going to be about structure, I would go stanza by stanza. And then I would look at, okay, in this stanza, if I'm looking at 5 and 6, the author develop the point of view, and then also how is the theme developed in this stanza, and then move on. So that's just, as I was thinking about it as a student and writing that essay, what would that organization structure look like with all of those standards in there?
Mm-hmm. Which is a really great way to think about, like, will this work, right? It's almost like the shortcut of writing the essay yourself, just trying to do that envisioning of what would it look like for a student to put this analysis together, and will it make sense? Will it flow? Will it be too much? So all really great considerations. We've got to get back to the group. They're probably over there being like, what's happening? But I really want to thank Jennifer for sharing, and thank everybody for their input and insight. Lots of really great thinking. Jennifer, hopefully you're leaving with some ideas about where you want to go with this. And again, those one-on-ones will be a good opportunity to make those decisions. So I'm going to bring us back to the group, and I'll see you back there. So while we're waiting,
Everything that we said in the chat in that breakout room, will it show up in my comments as well?
I tried to pull everything from the chat into the module comments
Okay.
so that you have everything. I'll double check before I close the Zoom session to make sure
Okay.
it's all there for you.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Did you get pulled back in the middle of a sentence?
Sorta. We're
Sorry.
good. We got really into it, you know.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I know it's always hard to come back, but we want to make sure we have a little bit of time to reflect and talk about next steps.
That's fine.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, welcome back, everybody. We only have about 7 minutes left, but I would love to hear some reflections about, what insights are emerging from this workshopping process, or getting a little metacognitive, thinking about how you might be able to use some of these processes and ways of thinking in your work. So I've posted a set of reflection questions in the chat, 2 from the kind of learner perspective and 2 from the leader perspective. I'd love for everybody to choose one of those reflection questions and share some thinking in the chat. Maybe we'll have a couple of verbal share outs, and then we'll talk about one-on-one signups.
Can I share verbally? I'm assuming you can hear me okay.
Yes, ma'am.
As a coach within the building and a leader within the building, I'm finding my own knowledge and understanding and digging into the standards is going deeper myself during conversations. And I'm thinking through this analysis, it almost at times is paralyzing, because you're looking at it and you're thinking, I know what I want to get this task to be, but it's not quite lining up. Or it's, how do I get these mini lessons to scaffold and make sure that my students are going to get there? And how do I help then the teacher who's going to be teaching these lessons? So I think as a coach, just knowing that we need to actually look at the rigor of the standards. And I've addressed that across all content areas over the last couple of weeks, just since we've had our conversations, and truly understanding to look beyond, are we asking something superficial? Are we asking something that's going to have impact?
That's a really powerful reflection. Thank you for sharing that. And I know it can seem like there's a lot to do, right? When you start getting into this process and thinking about everything that you want to change about the kind of assignments that are being given or the way they're being taught in classrooms. But it's important to remember that it's a process of growth over time. And what we know, the really encouraging thing, I think, from the research is that when you focus on the rigor of the task in the way that we have been doing over these last couple of weeks, even just putting that more rigorous task in front of students, even if nothing else changes, provides better learning opportunities and even better student results. So even if it still feels like we're fumbling a little bit about, like, what does it look like to provide the instruction and scaffolding around this, and how do we make this more systematic, just putting these richer, more rigorous tasks in front of students gets an immediate lift. And then you learn as you go, from analyzing the student work, reflecting, refining, all that good stuff over time. So it's a really important first step in a process. Lots of great reflections coming in the chat as well. Lovely. All right, so keep reflecting. If you haven't gotten yours in there, I want to make sure we talk about some important next steps before we go. So I've mentioned the one-on-ones. I want to get everybody into the sign-up sheet and explain how it will work so that you can really take advantage of this opportunity. So I'm posting a link in the chat. And this is just to a Google spreadsheet. So the idea here is that several of us have provided times that we are holding for one-on-one workshops, and you can sign up to workshop during one of these times simply by putting your name in the appropriate row, and then the facilitator with whom you have signed up will, let me make sure I'm opening the right window here. Is this it? Nope. Is that it? Sorry, for some reason my Zoom Knowledge today is failing me. The facilitator that you're signing up with will send you a calendar invitation for that time, and it'll be a 45-minute session in Zoom, one-on-one. And what we have found is that the group workshops are a really good way to generate ideas, get you thinking in new directions, get you moving on the next iteration of your task, kind of that divergent thinking process. And then the one-on-one workshops are a great opportunity to really focus, refine, and make decisions with somebody, again, that outside perspective. So you can sign up with me. Jen has some times available. Also, my colleague, Marika Howie, who's a really wonderful, fully certified LDC coach in Arkansas, is available for some of these sessions. So please feel free to, nab the time that works for you. And if you do not see a time that will work for you, please just reach out to me and we will make something work, because we want to make sure that everybody has this opportunity. And you'll notice that the times really range, starting right away on Monday of next week and ranging all the way through near the end of October. And that's because you're being asked to submit your task for national peer review by November 1st, which we'll talk more about in the coming weeks. But this way you have some breathing room. If you want to just get it done now before we even finish these sessions, you can sign up sooner. If you want to give yourself a little more time to work and then meet closer to that deadline for national peer review submissions, that's what those later times in the month are good for. So consider that as you sign up, and just let us know if you have any questions or, again, scheduling issues that come up that may need a different time. And you should sign up with your collaborators if you are working together with somebody. So the ideal scenario is that, both of you or all three of you would be in the session together. So before we do final steps, any clarifying questions about one-on-one workshops? All right. So I also just wanted to briefly address, I know a couple of you had mentioned that you have fall breaks coming up in one of our last two sessions in October. And so we will be holding our sessions at the normal time. If you know that you won't be able to make one, if you may know that we have several cohorts going through this process right now, and we have other sessions on Monday afternoons. If you would like to sign up to be in a Monday afternoon session instead of the usual Friday session, let me know as soon as possible, because it would actually be, I know it seems like really quick turnaround, and it is, but like next week's session would be on Monday, whereas ours happens at the end of the week as opposed to the following Monday. So if that's a possibility for you to make sure that you don't miss some of the content from the last 2 weeks, let me know. Yes, the Monday sessions are 4 p.m. Eastern time. If that's not an option, just let us know that you won't be there because of your fall break, and you can watch the recording afterwards. So we won't be doing test workshopping, but we will still be doing some collaborative content over the last 2 weeks, as well as getting more in depth about what it looks like to submit for national peer review. As you're going forward for these last 2 weeks, your asynchronous work is now really all about finalizing your task. There are still some references to course sessions in the homework, but it's more about just becoming familiar with what's in those later sessions. You're not really being asked to complete more action items in the courses at this point. It's all about that task. So doing your one-on-one, continuing to collaborate with one another to get to a final draft is really the focus of these last 2 weeks. And as always, I'll send a follow-up email either on Monday or Tuesday of next week with the video, the chat, and a recap of the work for the week. All right, I think that's it. So let's do our final word whip, and then we will stay on for a few minutes at the end if anybody has individual questions or you need troubleshooting on something. But I see lots of people already in there getting signed up for one-on-ones, which is going to be great fun. So we're looking forward to those. So before you leave, as your ticket out the door, as always, a word or phrase in the chat, something that is resonating you from our work together today, and then you can go on with your lovely Friday. Wonderful. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.